Here. I'm Yannis Tsaousis. I'm from Greece. I am a psychologist. I'm a psychometrician, actually. And I work at the University of Crete as associate professor in psychometrics. My main research interests are in test development, measurement theory, especially focused on personality, but also for measurement of cognitive abilities. Is that okay? Can I start? Okay, thank you. So what I'm going to present you today is a study in which I will try to examine whether there is an effect of the type of university that students graduate here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, whether they have graduated from old universities, and whether there are any differences among the participants that have graduated from new established universities. So here is the agenda, but I will skip it in order to save time. I will present very briefly the theoretical framework of my presentation. The truth is that until recently in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia there were very, very few public universities, around 6. However, the recent economic development forced the government to start establishing new universities. Today, there are more than 20 universities. I don't remember exactly the number, but I think there are 28 universities around Saudi Arabia. And the research questions that I would like to present you today are the following. First, I would like to explore the learning outcomes of individuals graduated, as said earlier, of an old university compared to graduates from a new university, based on the scores of the teacher competency test. However, I would like also to explore the psychometric properties of the measure that I have used to examine the learning outcomes, the teacher's competency test, the general form. A very, very brief description of this measure. It tests whether or not the minimum level of standards, including the knowledge and skills that cover the basic aspects of a subject, is met by candidates applying for teaching positions. The results of this test are very often used for screening candidates for teaching positions by the Ministry of Education here in Saudi Arabia. The type of questions used is a multiple choice format, with 4 options. One is correct, all the others are wrong. As a matter of fact, the TCT consists of 2 different tests. One, it is called general test, containing 75 items, covering these dimensions that you see here: planning for learning, promoting learning, supporting learning, and professional responsibility. But there is also a specialized test containing 88 items that covers basic areas of each major addressed. Here you can see some demographic information regarding the sample that I used. I used 4,000 individuals. You can see the proportions according to across gender, across type of university from where they have graduated, and their mean age. Now, a few words about the analytic strategy that I followed. I decided first to examine the factorial structure of the test, because I wanted to be sure whether the 4-factor model that the developers of the test suggest is valid with my data. And then I decided to examine the psychometric properties of the test using IRT framework, and especially the RAS model. Let's go on the results. As I said earlier, the first aim of this analysis was to examine different suggested models. I examined the 1-factor model, in which all items indicate a general factor, in this case the teaching proficiency. I used this model as a base model on which the other models were compared. The original four-factor model, as the NCA people assume when they developed this test, and the bifactor model, in which a general factor posed to account for the commonality of all manifest variables of the test, and the four specific factors representing the hypothesized unique influence of the specific factors above and beyond the effects of this general factor. So you can see here the results from confirmatory factor analysis. As you can see, the bifactor model seems to fit the data better than the other two. So this is an indication that we are speaking about a unidimensional construct rather than a multidimensional. And for that reason, I decided to go on when I examine a little bit deeper the psychometric properties of the test using the IRT framework. This is a graphical representation of the model. You can see that this is the general competency factor that explains better the variance than the four distinct dimensions. And here there are the fit indices for this model. Just let you a couple of seconds to have a look. And now I'm going to present you the results from the IRT analysis. Very briefly, I would like to remind to some of you that you are not very familiar with this statistical analysis, that the RAS model is part of the IRT, of item response theory analysis, and it describes the association between a person's ability, let's say in this case teaching proficiency or teaching competency, and the probability of that person to give a right answer to a particular item. The main advantage of this method is that it places the individual level of the underlying trait and the item difficulty under the same metric. How it works? The main focus of this analysis is to see whether the observed data are against the assumptions made by the RAS model. If the assumptions are met, then the raw scores of the test we can assume that accurately reflects the ability level of the underlying trait. And here are the steps, because I followed a step-wise procedure, the different steps that I followed in order to examine different parts of the characteristics of the item, of the measure. First of all, I ran into it very quickly. First of all, I examined the overall fit of the model. Then I tested the two of the basic assumptions that should be met in order to run IRT response theory, the unidimensionality and the local dependency among the items. Then I examined the individual items, whether they fit the RAS model or not. Then I examined whether the items line across all the ability of the ability of the measure, and then I examined whether there is any effect on differential item functioning across university type in this case, and the reliability of the measure. Let's go on. First of all, as an overall fit statistics, I use the item trait interaction score. You can see here for this graph, this plot, sorry, that there is a statistical significant result, which is not something that I was expected, or it should be non-significant result in order to be sure that the score reflects the hierarchical order of the items across the trait. But you have to bear in mind that I used a very, very large sample, 4,000 individuals, so it was almost impossible to get a non-statistically significant result. Here are the results from the reliability analysis. This program provides us two different indices of reliability. First, the popular alpha reliability for examining internal consistency, and an index which is more related to the item response framework, item response theory framework, the fit separation index. In both cases, as you will see, the results are well above the minimum accepted level of 0.70. You can also here see results from the unidimensional analysis that I conducted. So how it works? In order to identify whether the model, the measure, or the items are unidimensional or not, we run a principal component analysis on the residuals of the items. Then we split the items into two different categories, two different constellations of items. The first one is the constellation of items that is positively related to the first principal component, and the second one is the constellation of items that is negatively correlated with the first principal component. Then I run different t-tests for each person, assuming that there is no any difference between their scores. If the number of statistically significant t-tests is quite low, then we can assume for unidimensionality. If it is large, then we can assume that the measures different aspects of the trait. In this case, as you can see, the statistically significant results, t-tests, were 124 compared to the 4,000 comparison that we did, which is only 3% of the total amount of the conducted t-tests. So we can assume quite safely that this measure is a unidimensional measure, which is, of course, replicates the results from the confirmatory factor analysis. Here you can see that whether there is any local dependency among the items. As a matter of fact, local dependency is present if the response to one item assumes that an individual needs to know the correct answer from a previous item. We have local dependency where the residual correlations among the items or between two items it's above 0.20. Thankfully, we didn't find any such a value. Here you can see the individual item, the table from the individual item fit analysis. There were some items that were misfitted according to the RAS model, and as I will show you later, I decided to remove them in order to see how the characteristics of the test are better. And you can see here also the results from the differential item functioning analysis. There was one item actually that exhibited differential item functioning. It was item 75. You can see here that this line is the item characteristic curve for people that graduated from a new university, and this is the item characteristic curve for people that graduated from all universities. There is a statistically significant difference showing that this item discriminates graduates, although these graduates have the same ability level, which is something that should have been occur. Of course, you can see that this item is not a very good item because it's far away from the RAS assumption. And you can see here the representation of the items and the person across the same metric, as I said in the beginning of my presentation. Here you can see the representation of the items and the individuals after removing the misfitted items. It's a nice representation, although there are some gaps that needed to be filled later on in order to be able to measure accurately people that are at this, for example, point of the ability level. And here you can see, and I'm almost done, the differences in scores among the individuals who graduated from all schools, all universities, all the established universities. These are represented by the blue bars, and the scores for individuals graduated for new universities. You can see here that there is a difference in logit metric between the two groups. It says here that the individuals from old universities perform better than individuals from new universities, and this difference is statistically significant. So, very, very quickly, some of the conclusions. First of all, as I said earlier, individuals graduated from old universities perform better on teachers' competency test than individuals graduated from new universities. This result is in line with results from previous studies. For example, we have a study from U Multi-Rank Association, the International University Ranking, who found that the older universities tend to perform better than younger ones across different measures of research excellence. Furthermore, another study by McCormack and Associates in 2013 found that the departments in older universities tend to be better managed than departments in newer universities. Some reasons for this difference.
Can you quickly?
Yes, I just finished showing some of the possible reasons. More robust organizational structure, better infrastructure, more experienced staff, better networking after graduation, and so on. And as I said earlier, this test seems to be a test with sound psychometric properties that can be used to efficiently evaluate teachers' proficiency. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sure that I will be ready to answer any question you have after the end of other presenters' speech.
Thank you very much, Dr. Renanis.
Thank you.
If you have any question to Dr. Renanis, please jot it down. Write it. اكتبوه وإن شاء الله في نهاية اللقاء سيكون هناك مناقشة للجميع. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. George Siderit. He's going to talk about the he's going to talk about learning outcomes in math as a function of type of university and application and of multi-level structural equation modeling. The floor is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you so much. I really thank you all for being here today. It's a great pleasure to be in this very interesting and stimulating conference. The purpose of my presentation is to present to you the methodology of multi-level structural equation modeling in terms of looking at the measurement part of the model that a simple structure could be different at different levels of analysis, and also model to you a structural part of the model. Participants in this study were 5,445 individuals who took the math teacher's test, which is a national examination at NCA. This measure assesses 6 different math skills. Yeah. So the math measure measures 6 different mathematics disciplines or competencies or skills, which are algebra, numbers and operations, algebra, geometry, probability and statistics, and discrete mathematics and mathematics education, which I did not include in the present report because they consisted of very few items and did not represent themselves with proper psychometric properties, so I eliminated them from the current analysis. Data were analyzed by means of multi-level structural equation modeling, with the purpose of identifying the optimal simple structure for this math measure first, and whether that's identical at both levels of analysis, the person level and the university level, and then structurally speaking trying to predict that math achievement using person level predictors such as gender and age, and university level predictors, which is the old and new university establishment. So After I showed you the measure, why would I even show you a unidimensional structure for the math competence? Well, because at the student level, at the personal level, when I first ran the mathematical four-factor model, it gave me correlations between the constructs of the range between, let's say, I'll give you some of the correlations between the first and the second construct, 0.969. The first and the third, 0.850. The first and the fourth, 0.877. The second and the third, 0.922. And the second with the fourth, 0.909, and so forth. So these were just a little too high of correlations to assume that this is a four-factor structure, and without testing really a unidimensional construct, in the case that really we're talking about one latent trait of math competence. So when I tested a unidimensional structure at both levels of analysis, this is the between university level and this is the between person level, it gave me a chi-square of 800 discrepancy type units. And you see the descriptive fit indices were kind of borderline with good errors, which is due to the large sample size. But then when I modeled the individuals as being represented best by a unidimensional structure, but at the university level to have four distinct constructs, I got only 629 chi-square units compared to the 800 before, and much better fit across pretty much everything. And because these models are nested with 23 degrees of freedom, we see that the critical value of 35 was greatly exceeded, as the difference chi-square test was 168 units. And of course, I had to look at the parsimonious index such as Akaike, because when you model more things, of course, you're going to find more things. And the Akaike is a great index, a very simple one too, that tells you whether these additional modeling options that we added are justifiable with the goal of parsimony. So the Akaike with the multidimensional model at the between university level was also better. So across all the evidence that we had, this was the optimal simple structure for math achievement. The intra-class correlations in terms of what types of information, the item level information, how much of that variance was at the university level ranged between 1 and 6.3%. So there is some variance there that we had to model. And this is the full model. What we see is at the between person level, we had two predictors, gender and age. Now we now know that the effects of gender on math achievement is a myth. There were some trends developmental between 9 and 13 years of age or something like that. A long time ago, we now know it's a myth. We found a null effect. There is nothing there and nothing with the age of individuals at the person level. But at the university level, when we tried to model those relationships as a function of old and new university, all these structural paths were negative, suggesting that across all math domains, individuals in the older establishments had significantly higher scores. So to conclude, one of the most important conclusions is that using this multi-level structural equation modeling approach, one should not assume that the same simple structure should fit the data at both levels of analysis. What this analysis suggested is that if we had assumed that a multivariate model or a unidimensional model fitted the data across the board, we would lose information. And there was additional information that were worth modeling. And one question, of course, of interest is, what does that mean? Why individuals are best represented by a unidimensional structure? Is it that individuals are good across the board? So if somebody is good in algebra, they are also good in probability and statistics, and because the correlation is estimated based on the mean, those above the mean on one trait, they are above the mean on the other trait, and that's why we find that the constructs are highly correlated, and to a one-factor structure best fits the data. What happens at the university level? Why do we have much lower correlations between traits, algebra versus probability and statistics, for example, at the university level? Well, let me think through like my university. Maybe in the math department, there is some faculty and professors who are stronger in algebra or emphasize different the department and the university emphasizes more one domain compared to another domain. And we know that some universities and some departments are stronger in some domains compared to some other domains. So maybe that difference in emphasis is translated into different learning outcomes from the students, and which is why the constructs at the university level are less correlated and they are better describing the students at the university level. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gregos. We'll give you 30 minutes to introduce yourself, because we thank you for finishing before the time. So
yeah. Thank you.
Give us your...
I'm an assistant professor of survey methods at Harvard Medical School and also an associate professor of EdPsych at the University of Athens.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Our third speaker is Dr. Ari Hohta. And he's going to talk about using the common European framework of reference in the evaluation of educational achievement of foreign and second languages. So we'll focus on the languages. The floor is yours, Dr. Ari. You will have 10 minutes. Similarly, if you have any question about what Dr. Gerges have presented, please write it down, jot it down, and we'll get to you at the end of the presentations.
Okay. Does it work? Okay. Salam alaikum. Thank you for the organizers for this opportunity to give this talk here. I'm a language assessment person, and I also do research on applied linguistics, language learning of foreign and second languages. Briefly, I'm going to talk about the Common European Framework of Reference and how it has become very influential in Europe and beyond, and how it's been used in educational evaluation studies. So this is the book in English. It has been translated into, I think, more than 40 languages, including Arabic, Chinese, Japanese. So it has become quite influential also in Asia and Middle East. Basically, what it does, it has a vertical dimension, a scale or a rubric perhaps, that defines levels of knowing another language from very basic to very advanced proficiency. It defines what it is to know a language, what a person can do at different levels of proficiency. It also has a horizontal dimension. It defines a very great range of different kinds of skills, areas of life, areas of context, activities, functions, situations, text, and so on. Basically, the scale consists of level A, which is basic proficiency, then level B, which is independent language user, and level C, which is about very skillful use of language. And these levels are divided into two sub-levels in the framework, called A1, A2, and so on. Very briefly, you can see a very brief characterization of what kind of language use is typical of different levels here. In some applications of the scale, like in my own country, Finland, some of the scales have been divided into subscales for well, educational purposes, to give more easily reachable targets for language education. What is the CFR? Actually, it is not a theory or model of language proficiency, nor is it a recipe for designing language tests. It's rather a resource that supports anybody who has to talk about foreign and second language proficiency. It gives a meta-language to talk about what it means to be a beginner or intermediate or whatever level of proficiency of learner. A couple of words about why are the common levels of proficiency useful. First of all, it provides a definition of language proficiency. it gives a more common understanding of what it means to know a language, how language progresses. It increases the intelligibility, transparency, and comparability of learning objectives, and also assessments and certificates. So it's about criterion referenced measurement and assessment. So when, for example, all major language examinations, international ones, have been linked with the CFR, it means linking to the 6-level system. And also some recent international and national educational achievement studies in foreign and second languages have actually based their work on the CFR. As to the national, international examinations, if you go to the Cambridge examination website, you'll see there several examinations laid out across the CFR levels. The 2 studies I'm going to briefly talk about are a European Commission study, including several languages, as you can see, and a Finnish study also including several languages. So what they did, what the CFR was used for in these studies, it provided an overall assessment framework. It helped us to specify the target levels of the tests. It helped us in the selection of the content. It helped us in rating performances for speaking and writing. And it importantly helped us to report results of the assessments as proportion of students who had achieved in different countries or in Finland, depending on the study, particular proficiency levels. The advantages of the CFR, as I said very briefly, it provided a very useful assessment framework, but it also enables something that is not typical, well, at least within certain limitations. It enables us to compare the results of different studies. So Finland did not take part in the European study, but we had our own national study, and both were based on the CFR, so that gives us a basis of comparing some of the results. So I'm showing you the results for writing in English, as reported for, I only selected 3 countries, Sweden, Estonia, Netherlands, and the European Union average. And you can see the proportion of students who achieved B1, B2, A1, and so on in these countries. Then I can compare that with the Finnish study. We have a dual system. We have a Finnish medium educational system and a Swedish medium educational system because we are officially a bilingual country. And as you can see, we can compare how the Finnish-speaking students did in writing in English, how did our Swedish-speaking students did in writing in English, and because of Swedish and English are closely related languages, sharing a lot of vocabulary and structures, it's always easier for our Swedish-speaking students to get higher scores in English, whereas Finnish is a totally different language, a non-Indo-European language with a very different system. It's harder for us, our learners, to achieve higher levels in English. So, to come to the final part, we have some challenges in the CFR. As I said, it's not the kind of a very useful tool at the detailed design of language test. You have to use other sources. It gives you a useful framework, kind of a checklist for content and things like that. Also, the standard setting, deciding on the cut scores between CFR levels, can be done in many different ways. You can define mastery in different ways. So that is a challenge for comparing studies who have been based on CFR but might have used slightly different approach. And also I would point out that it's a bit difficult to say how comparable are the levels for production and comprehension in languages in general. The CFR makes a claim about that, but I think that's one of its problems. So, to conclude, CFR has been highly influential in Europe and also beyond, and it has also entered the realm of educational achievement assessments. And I've briefly shown how the CFR was used in these studies, and I've highlighted advantages because that was, had not people thought that it's useful, they would not have actually based the design on the framework. And if you want to read more about this, my paper is available in the proceedings. And this is my email. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ari, for finishing before time. So please, if you have any question about assessment of language use or language programs, please jot it down. At the end, we are going to take these questions. Our third speaker is from the female side, Dr. Najah Abdullahi. Are you there, Dr. Najah?
I am.
Okay, so she is going to talk about how do faculty beliefs and practices affect learning, how the faculty's belief and practices affect learning outcomes assessment. Dr. Najah will have 10 minutes. If you can kindly introduce yourself, where did you come from, where are you working, just briefly in 3 seconds. We'll embarrass you these 3 seconds at the end.
All right.
Thank you.
you.
I'm sorry, I don't have any CV to introduce the speakers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Now, first, I'd like to thank our hosts for their hospitality and for organizing this scientific meeting, which is really interesting and constructive. I'm Najia Abdullahi from Morocco. I teach critical reading at the School of Information Science, which is part of the University Mohammed V in Rabat. I've been involved in assessment for more than 30 years myself and responsible for that. I've been responsible for assessment of English, English assessment, and for assessment in my school for more than 30 years. Okay, still low? All right, I still have, okay. Now, today I'll talk about the role of faculty beliefs and practices and how they affect learning outcomes assessment. In fact, assessment of learning outcomes no longer meets the sole purpose of safeguarding the quality of academic learning, but it has become, it doesn't work? Oh, okay. But it focuses on employability skills, it focuses on accountability, on competition and comparability among institutions, among nations even, among programs and subjects. Now, this means that assessments should be objective, quantifiable, replicable, based on procedures and techniques. But this really assumes that faculty and other stakeholders share the same perceptions of purposes, criteria, standards, and context. But we know, the literature shows anyway, that the literature shows that assessments may have different objectives. Actually, Newton in 2007 presented 18 different objectives for assessments. Now, among these, we can cite measuring learners' current achievements and abilities. Assessment may aim at checking the adaptability of learners in the short and in the long term. It may aim at ranking students. It may aim at looking at the suitability of learners to job market. They may as well have formative aims like improving learning, improving programs, teaching methods. They may as well serve accountability and institution accreditation reasons. So objectives are very varied and maybe even contradictory. Now, faculty beliefs and practices have not, well, here I'm talking about higher education. Very little studies have been carried out about faculty beliefs and practices in higher education. But this literature, though scarce, has shown that faculty hold different conceptions, and their conceptions, cultures, expertise, and visions and attitudes affect their choices and practices. And moreover, they are more engaged when assessment serve learning purposes and not simply the job market. Now, the standards and criteria, people, well, we've been hearing about that quite a lot, but it is something difficult to achieve. In fact, a learner's massification and diversity of contexts makes the interpretation and implementation of standards and criteria very problematic. The same thing, standards and criteria may lead to narrow responses and invalid assessment. Students become cue seekers and they are not engaged in deep learning but simply in adapting to very narrowly defined standards testing. So we miss in that in this context this creativity we are looking for in higher education, this depth of learning, wealth of learning. We have to stop. The faculty sometimes are obliged simply to meet the testing requirements rather than answer students' questions and go deeply in certain aspects or redress some problems the students may have, particular problems they may have. So the class will no longer be focused on learning but on exams. Context of the study, so this is why my study comes in here, to look into the faculty's conceptions and practices and how they affect assessments. My study was carried out in Morocco, where higher education aligns with the European system, which is you have bachelor degree, master degree, and then doctorate degree. And it is market-driven. It has a market-driven vision. It cares for the cost effectiveness, for visibility, comparability. Reforms are carried out in managerial manner, top-down manner. Little is known about faculty beliefs and practices. Participants, it was 17 voluntary faculty, 8 males and 9 females, 12 full professors, 3 associate professors and 2 assistant professors. The faculty experience ranges from 3 to over 20 years. 11 disciplines and 7 institutions of higher education in Rabat were involved in this study. Now, the procedure and limitations. This study relied on semi-structured interviews, which the duration was not limited. It varied from 1.5 hours to 3 hours. And this depended on the interviewee's answers and explanations. So they were really at ease. We talked in a friendly way so that we can have some genuine answers. 4 sets of questions were used to guide the interviews. The first one was concerned with the interviewee's context, educational background. The second set of questions were related to their conceptions. The third set of questions was related to their criteria and the methods they used. And the last one was related to how they viewed challenges and the solutions they proposed. The study was limited in the way that it used only a small number of respondents. And it lacked, of course, quantifiable responses, but it has largely met the intended objective in the sense that I managed to obtain very authentic, genuine answers from the faculty, and it was an exploratory study, just the first type, research in this sense. Research questions, 3 questions. What perceptions do Moroccan faculty hold regarding the objectives of learning outcomes assessment? 2, what criteria, references and methods the faculty use to design and implement assessments? And the third one, how the faculty perceive the quality of assessments in their institutions and the challenges they think affect assessments and the alternatives they propose. Now the findings, here the first set of findings, Moroccan faculty perceptions regarding the objectives of learning outcomes assessment. The objectives here, I will talk from the most important to the least important objectives. The first one, supporting learning. The second one, judging students' abilities. The third one, judging content acquisition. And the last one, qualification and suitability to job market. Now, it's worth it's noteworthy that supporting learning was mentioned 48 times, whereas qualification reasons were mentioned 8 times and suitability to job market only twice. So it shows the importance the faculty pay to supporting learning rather than simply getting assessment. Now, the references and criteria and methods used by faculty to design and implement assessments. Now, the first finding that there is a gap between the wide respondents' stated objectives and the narrow criteria they use in practice. So, for example, they would talk about objectives of learning and things like that, but then they would, especially with the final exams, they would pay attention to the number of students, to the large number of students, or to the linguistic ability and things like that. The criteria used focus was, which leads us to the second finding, that the criteria used focused on overcoming practical constraint. The third finding, that the faculty, professional, institutional, and international standards are ranked after practical criteria. And the last one, continuous assessments and final exams were completely different. So faculty in continuous assessment, they were more at ease. They would emphasize on using exams which aim at improving learning, adding information practice. They would use methods varying from direct questions to project preparation to paper presentations and, assessments which they were more at ease with assessments, whereas final exams were focusing on a summative paradigm rather than anything else. So they were interested only in direct questions, or because they were simply the numbers of students who are overwhelming, and they simply take into account that when they have hundreds of students, they simply think about the number of questions they have to correct and how to organize, how to avoid cheating and things, constraints like this. 1 minute? Okay. Now, maybe I will jump to the conclusions. All right, the conclusions here. The faculty understudy hold a variety of conceptions. The faculty conceptions are noticeably different from a market-driven vision. The faculty define assessment objectives in terms of supporting learning. And for faculty, learners' generic abilities and competencies attainment are more essential than suitability to a given job. And the faculty focus on practical issues in assessment. The proposed alternatives highlight significance of the human factor and ethical behavior, either from the part of the faculty as well as from the part of students. And the last one, the faculty's striking disregard of the current reform of whatever comes up in managerial manner. So they really are interested in what they're doing in the classroom and their students first. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Najiha. Very nice basic research about new frontiers, about faculty. If you have any question about this paper, please write it down. We'll come back to it after the presentation by Dr. Judd. Dr. Judd Thomas is going to talk about moral decisions, outcomes, and assessments. If you can kindly introduce yourself in 30 minutes. You will have 10 minutes and 30 seconds for your introduction, please.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to participants in both rooms. My name is Tim Judd. I am the Assistant Dean for Academic Assessment and Associate Professor for Behavioral Science and Leadership at the United States Military Academy at West Point. I'm not going to be giving you any information about psychometrics or statistics at all today. My topic is going to be about research that's been happening for the last 15 or 20 years that should influence how we deal with one particular student learning outcome. And this is actually my whole presentation in one slide at the beginning. Student learning outcomes related to moral or ethical reasoning in higher education almost exclusively focus on moral reasoning. The research shows, however, that moral reasoning does not really predict moral behavior very well. But I think that research in decision-making and research in the psychology of morality can give us some insights into this discrepancy. And that should have implications for how we frame student learning outcomes, how we engage in pedagogy to achieve those student learning outcomes, and how assessment can benefit from this research. First, moral reasoning and moral behavior. This is a typical statement that we see in higher education. Graduates recognize moral issues and apply moral ethical reasoning in decision making. This comes from the work of Lawrence Kohlberg ever since he published his dissertation about 50 years ago, and he focused on moral reasoning and moral development of reasoning. And we have since then had a lot of emphasis on moral reasoning. We have the defining issues test, which is a fairly robust test of moral reasoning, and it determines at what level someone can reason morally. For example, there is given a situation for a man whose wife is seriously ill and he can't afford the medicine to treat her because it's a very expensive medicine. And the question on the survey would be, should this man steal the drugs or not? The defining issues test is not so much concerned with whether you decide he should steal the drugs or not. It's concerned with your justification for it. If you say he should not steal the drugs because he could get punished, that's a low level of moral reasoning. If you say he should not steal the drugs because of the society's laws or expectations, that's kind of a mid-level of reasoning. Or if he should steal the drugs because of some universal principles, the sanctity of human life, for example, that should trump society's laws, then that's the highest level of principled reasoning. The problem is that this does not really predict very well what people actually do. And I think that there are a few areas of research that can help us understand this. One is the research that's been done on the psychology of morality. One of these areas is the social intuitionist model. And they claim in the social intuitionist model that moral reasoning is really kind of a post hoc rationale for a decision you've already made. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about how they came to that conclusions. This is based on the work of Jonathan Haidt and others. One is that they have demonstrated that we have certain moral foundations. And among those moral foundations are such things as care-harm dimension, fairness-cheating dimension, loyalty-betrayal dimension, sanctity-degradation dimension, and a few others. And through cross-cultural studies, they have found these moral dimensions that exist in all cultures. They've done studies with infants at 3 months of age and found that they can recognize when things are not being fair or when there is care and harm happening on. And there's also this idea of moral confounding. When people make moral decisions, they're presented with how they're not really rational decisions. They stick to them anyway, even though they can't justify them. Now, this suggests to the moral intuitionists that we have that, much like language skills, we have a genetic endowment for these moral dimensions. And they get developed, like language skills do, within the context of the culture in which we grow up in. Joshua Green takes this research a little bit further. He says that he thinks that evolutionarily we developed developed morality as a way of promoting group cooperation. Groups that cooperate are going to be more successful groups and can continue to propagate their genes. This leads us to what that can tell us about how decision-making happens. So the research on decision-making that I'm going to talk about comes from the work of Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate, in his work on decision-making. And he talks about fast and slow decision-making. Slow decision-making is the kind of deliberate, rational, effortful, uniquely human kind of decision-making that we all are very proud of our ability to do. However, it seems that most of the decisions we make in our life are not those kind of decisions. They are fast, they are intuitive, they are effortless, they are associative, and they are pre-conscious. We come to decisions before we are actually aware of what they are. And that kind of explains some of the confounding effects that Jonathan Haidt and others found in moral decision-making. Okay, so we now have an idea of how these moral dimensions that are part of our genetic endowment can influence our decision-making in this fast decision-making process. So what do we do with this? Well, there has been some promising research in a few areas that kind of highlight or can explain the differences that we have between rational moral decision-making and actual moral behavior. One of those areas is moral sensitivity, that you can recognize that there are moral components in given situations. And there's been a fair amount of work done in this area. One of the most promising areas is what is called the centrality of moral identity. And that predicts behavior very well. The centrality of moral identity talks about how a series of moral traits are how you define yourself, or close to how you define yourself, or whether they're not very close to how you define yourself. And the people who have a higher level of centrality of moral identity, their moral decision, predicts more their behavior, their moral behavior. High centrality of moral identity is a good predictor of moral behavior. And if we go back to the intuitionist model of moral identity, of moral behavior, we come to the idea that schema that we have developed are a key component in social intuitionist model. The well-developed, complex schema are likely more accessible and can influence the fast thinking that we have. I'm not going to talk very much about the neurocognitive model of moral decision-making, except to say that functional magnetic resonance imaging studies also support this kind of dual processing. They show that different areas of the brain are involved when we make these fast automatic decisions, and different areas of the brain are involved when you do these more slow, deliberate, rational kinds of decision processes. We also get information from people who have had brain injuries. When they have their cognitive, rational functioning still available, and yet their emotionality or social contexts are damaged, they make very poor decisions in their own personal lives and in the lives of others. So how can this influence our student learning outcomes? I think that there's about 6 areas where we might consider adjusting our student learning outcomes so that we can take advantage of this research that I've just been briefly describing. One is having a knowledge of moral standards. The second is being able to recognize that there are moral components of situations. A third is to the one we are very accustomed to is being able to apply reasoning to complex moral situations. The fourth one is understanding the moral decision-making process. This is a metacognitive part of student learning outcomes that I'm talking about, and it is the material I've just presented to you. And the last one is internalization of moral functioning, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And that has more to do with that sense of moral identity. Okay, and also the demonstration of moral behavior. Now this will have implications for pedagogy also. I only have a few here. One is developing a knowledge base. This is to talk about or to understand what your own moral sense is, what your own moral obligations are, or what your ethical principles are. Another is to develop the familiar reasoning skills, applying these ethical and moral principles to reasonings to situations. But what we really need is strategies to develop these schema, these deeply held ideas of how you can apply, or what the moral concepts are, how you apply these concepts to different situations. and that these schema become readily accessible to your moral identity. Okay, implications for assessment. Knowledge of moral standards, we have traditional testing methods for that. Recognition of moral components of authentic situation. This is being able to identify real-life scenarios and the moral components of those. Muriel Bibo has done that with several different areas, and it's a well-developed area. Application of reasoning to complex moral situations. Well, I've already talked about the defining issues test, so we have that readily available. Understanding the moral decision-making process. This is what I have been talking about today. Understanding about fast and slow thinking, understanding about where morality comes from. Internalization of moral functioning. There is a centrality of moral identity scale that has been developed by Reed and Aquino that gives some sense of how central to your own identity are your moral traits. And lastly, a demonstration of moral behavior. I don't have many suggestions here. I think that you can use your own innovation in order to figure out how to determine whether people are actually making moral decisions and it's in line with their moral behavior. My conclusion. Moral reasoning alone is inadequate to describe moral functioning. Most decisions are a function of intuitive, preconscious associative processing. Moral functioning is influenced by available and accessible schema, the centrality of moral identity, and the recognition of moral components of a situation. Student learning outcomes, pedagogy, and assessment strategies should take advantage of these advances in understanding of moral decision-making. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hod, Dr. Thomas Judd. Now the floor is yours. If you have any question, any comment, please. We have a lunch after that, and you have to be precise. Otherwise, we'll not either take all of your questions or we'll not have time for lunch. So please, we have about 25 minutes for your questions and comments. We'll start with the ladies first. So let us get a question from the lady side. To any of the presenters, please specify to whom you are addressing the question.
Well, thank you, Doctor, but we don't have any question.
Thank you very much. That's good. Okay. Doctor.
Thanks a lot. Dr. Faisal Ma'ash from Al-Imam Islamic University. So, question one, I have two questions.
No, just one. We'll
just one
in the second round.
Yeah, okay. أفضفض يعني.
لا ما في. Question will start with أداة استفهام.
To save time, yes. To Dr. Professor Judd, so your notion of you have a genetic endowment for making some judgments or pedagogic decisions. Don't you think that there is a risk of probably legitimizing some unfair decisions about pedagogic assessment with this genetic or metacognitive basis of evaluation? And there's no, is there a room for quantifiability? Very brief question to, to Professor Ari Huta about the CFR, so the framework. So please, is there any study, statistical study about, which is multivariate, about countries, disciplines across skills, age, gender, which shows us some indications about the performance of testees, examinees per country, per age, gender, etc., so that the designers of international testing criteria will be illuminated by these findings. Thank you very much.
Your question about the genetic endowment of moral dimensions, I've summarized very, very briefly the whole range of research that was done there. And it's a whole series of complex studies. I don't think the area is finished yet. But can they be quantified? No, I think they can be inferred, much the way the genetic endowment of language is inferred through the work of Chomsky, if you're familiar with how he has done that. I think that's the same kind of model that we're talking about with the genetic endowment for moral dimensions. What was the second part of that? Or did I answer it? I think part of the applicability to pedagogic is self-knowledge. So having students kind of understand the process. Actually, we have some examples of how we've done that. We ask students to talk about some kind of decision they've made in the past and put it into the context of what we know about moral development and moral decision making. So it's a self-reflection process where they develop self-knowledge and some metacognitive skills about what decisions are like and what their moral behavior is like. You're welcome.
Can you hear me? Yes. When it comes to foreign and second language studies, international achievement studies, unfortunately the situation is much sort of weaker than when it comes to PISA studies. In 1970, IEA carried out a study of English and French as a foreign language. Then in the 1990s, the IEA tried to replicate the study in a larger scale, but failed to find enough funding to do that. Then this European Union study that I referred to, there is a link to their final report. It covered 14 European Union countries or regions, so that is the widest study that has been really well designed and conducted, and it includes a variety of background factors, including gender, and it sort of compares the performance across these 14 countries. The link is in my paper, and if you Google for European survey of language competencies, you'll come up with the site where you can download the final report. But apart from those studies, there are no well-designed international comparative studies. Now IEA and ETS are planning a study of English worldwide. I'm quite sure how that is making progress, but there is an effort to actually launch a study of English only worldwide hopefully in the near future.
Okay, thank you very much. Any question from this side?
Thank you. This is Dr. Muhammad Shahbaz from Majma University. I have a question for Dr. Najia, actually. She mentioned that the teachers, the faculty members lack vision of the market-driven vision. But my question is, she has 12 full professors in the data, and most of them have more than 20 years experience. And is this, related to the traditionality of those professors who have developed the kind of tradition for themselves and they are not willing to change? Maybe a study with more young teachers like lecturers and assistant professors might come up with a different result. Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Najiha?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Actually, as I mentioned in my presentation, this was one of the limitations of the study. Now, the range, I don't know whether, so I tried to get, I had 12 full professors, but I had 3 associate professors and 2 assistant professors who had less than, 10 years experience. So it was my sample was more or less balanced in terms of age. But as you say, it is really a limitation of the study, and I have the intention to carry out a more this was exploratory, just to set the basics of, to have an idea about what the professors, what the faculty think about assessment. But I have the intention to carry out a survey with more faculty in it. But I suppose that these people, what was good about this, that they really talked in a genuine way, and they talked in, they had no, because when you talk in official way, some people have some, how can I say, they don't, they have some constraints in talking openly. But with this small sample, I could manage to have them talk freely about what they believe. And it was anonymous. They knew that it was anonymous, and they had no constraints whatsoever to talk there about what they think. But it's not really only, there were more, it was balanced really among young people and older people. Thank you.
Any other questions?
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Dr. Ahmed Abdul Rauf, Imam Mohammed bin Saud Islamic University. My question will be basically directed to Dr. Yanis in regard to the paper and the test you talked about. I have a number of ideas I'd like to discuss with you. Have you compared the results that you obtained from the test in regard to other tests? I mean, have you tested them on another tool and compared the results whether there is any kind of concurrent validity we can establish in regard to the tests? And will you allow me to continue, please? And the other issue is, have you found any differences that could be attributed to gender in regard to the test? The same also applied to the nationality. Have you tried it on other nationalities? And the last and the most important point to me, you said we have old or experienced teachers and novice ones. My question is, could it be the difference in the results could be attributed to the experience which they gained within the field? In other words, the new ones can be the same when they take the same amount of experience. Thank you.
Okay, yes. First of all, I have no results so far for a different test measuring the same skills. This is the only test, as far as I know, that it's available here in the United Kingdom measuring teachers' competence. So far there is no any evidence for concurrent validity. However, I think it's a good point in order to replicate our results, to generalize our results. Now, the second question was related to other demographic variables, whether they they could affect the results. Yes, I've checked whether the results are affected by gender and age groups, but it didn't make any difference at all. But as I said in my presentation, I focused only on this variable this time, the different types of universities. So that's why I show you only results regarding this variable. But there were not any differences. And regarding the last question, as far as if I have understood correctly, you are discussing about the experience of professors, of faculty members. But I'm talking in my presentation for scores from students' point of view. So I mean, these are scores from students. And okay, I understand that maybe more experienced professors could affect the students better than more new professors. So this is an interesting idea. Could be, of course, could be examined in this data set, and I will take it in my mind.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, doctor, we have a question here.
اوكي الان ناخذ سؤال من الاخوات او سؤالين لان حقكم يكون في عدل بالعربي وبالانجليزي. تفضل.
شكرا. السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.
دكتورة ليلى سليمان، جامعة الملك فيصل الرياضيات. بسأل الدكتور تكلم عن نموذج المتعدد الابعاد ونموذج احادي الابعاد. بس عايز اعرف يستخدم النموذج ايهما احادي الابعاد ومتعدد الابعاد في الجامعات، أيهما أفضل؟
طيب شكرا.
نعطي السؤال الثاني الآن أو يجاوب الدكتور أول؟
It's about the use. Did you use unidimensional or multidimensional? I think the factorial analysis.
So that it was a unidimensional constraint.
Yeah, you did not pre-select it.
No, not at all.
هذا التحليل الإحصائي وينتج من تحليل الاختبار الأبعاد المتعددة للاختبار، هل هو أحادي الأبعاد أو متعدد الأبعاد. فلا يختار الطريقة، وإنما هذا التحليل ما يسمى الفاكتوريال اناليسيس، تحليل الأبعاد، هو الذي ينتج هل الاختبار أحادي أم ملتي.
I tested actually 3 different models using confirmatory factor analysis, but I also tried to replicate the findings with the ARTIM framework. In both cases, I found that this teacher competency best represented by a unidimensional construct, which I called general teacher's proficiency or teacher's competency. Okay.
طيب، هل هناك سؤال آخر من قاعة النساء؟
لا دكتور، شكرا.
الأخوة تفضل.
why you use the Rush model whenever it gives us one parameter. On the other side, there are more models give us more parameter.
Okay, yes, this is an interesting question, of course. I don't think that it's easy for me now to understand, to explain to you in details why, but just simply say that the RAS model seems to be very stable, although it takes into account only one parameter, the difficulty level, comparing to the other models. Just to mention that the vast majority of people using IRT model in the literature use this model because it's simpler and it provides more efficient interpretations of the results. That's why. Although, of course, you could use different models, the 2-parameter model or the 3-parameter model.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other question? تفضل.
دكتور أحمد الثقفي عميد كلية التربية جامعة الطائف. سؤال للدكتورة ناجية. بالنسبة للبحث اللي عملتيه اللي هو كيف تؤثر تصورات الأستاذ وممارساته على تقييم نتائج التعلم. ألا ترين معي أنه من الأفضل اللي هو العلاج، الوقاية خير من العلاج. الجامعة لو قدمت دورات تدريبية لعضوي التدريس المستجد الجديد يعني خاصة بنواجه التعلم، التقويم، أساليب التدريس، هذا مو أفضل من يعني ترك هذا.
Shall I answer? Yeah, well, thank you for your question. Actually, I didn't have time to present the faculty perceptions, the proposals of the faculty. But among these proposals were coordination and, of course, assessment literacy. And so we have, they mentioned many things, among them reasonable student-faculty ratios and faculty commitment and ethical behavior and coordination. So for them, this is what, when I talked about the human, emphasis on the human factor, this is really what was meant by that, there should be more attention to preparing the faculty and the students to their learning and to their assessment. So the problem for them, the roots of the assessment, the problems of assessment, not only in the learning outcomes assessment, but before that. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to present that. Thank you.
Okay, shukran. Is there any question from the lady side?
Okay. No, there is.
No?
Just a second. Yes, we have one question.
Okay, go ahead.
السلام عليكم. نور العمري، مشرفة من إدارة التربية والتعليم بحفر الباطن. سؤالي للدكتورة نجية. طبعا احنا عارفين انه لا شك ان تصورات بعض المعلمين وممارساتهم تؤثر في تقويم نتائج اللي هو نواتج التعلم. كيف يكون العلاج لمثل هؤلاء الفئة من المعلمين؟
Well, I think that coordination really and work, now I'm talking about higher education, so the through the research and through the answers of the faculty, it is faculty commitment. I mean, there isn't, and the recruitment of full-time faculty. When you have part-time faculty, usually they are busy with other jobs outside the university or the school where they teach, and so they are not fully committed committed to their work. This is one of the problems. The second one, the ethical behavior. This cannot be simply, or unethical behavior, this cannot be simply stopped by managerial or criteria or standards or assessment, but by coordination within the institution where they work, by implicating them into the learning they are presenting. So there should be some work from within rather than from outside. Is it okay? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Najih. Is there any question from the men side? Let's give everybody a portion. تفضل يا دكتور.
السلام عليكم. عزيز ندى من مدارس الظهران الأهلية في المنطقة الشرقية. سؤالي للدكتور ناجية، ورد في البحث اللي قامت به إنه المخرجات أو النواتج للجامعات الجديدة هي أضعف من المخرجات للجامعات القديمة. هل في أسباب لكده؟ لأنه ما وردش في البحث، يعني ليه؟ لماذا؟ شكرا.
طيب هو الذي بحث المسألة هذه أحد الأستاذين فليست الدكتورة نجيح.
عفوا أنا كأني
Can you comment on the differences between the new and old universities?
It's my speech.
I think Dr. Najih had a question being about the new and old university, which should have been addressed to a different speaker.
Yeah, this is a different speaker, okay. Not my.
Shukran, we'll handle it.
Thank you.
Well, I cannot really offer really intelligent interpretations as to what happens with the older establishments compared to the new ones. I was actually hoping that I would get more ideas from you, but would it be that the more established universities and institutions attract more qualified professors? Are they more experienced? Do they attract better students? Because what we did find is that across the board of math competencies, the old establishments had higher scores. So it wasn't just a chance finding across one domain, or it was all over the board, and that was a strong, strong effect, because I showed standardized coefficients. These were in the range of a medium effect size using coincidence, so it's like half a standard deviation. These are big, large effects. And I don't know, for example, the sizes of the universities. I don't know if in older establishments, for example, there is a different range, or they have smaller classes. Do they employ different medium of instruction? Do they use more small group instruction? Do they use different stimuli? I don't know. What we did find, though, is that what they do is something good, that the new establishments should also follow. But I'm pretty sure that you guys know better than I do.
Thank you very much. هل هناك سؤال عند الأخوات؟
ما في شكرا دكتور. الله يعطيك العافية.
زهير قاسم KFUPM King Fahd University. I would like to address this question to Dr. Judd about the assessment of moral assessment. Is it associated with a course taught in the program, or it is as the student enter the program?
At my university, at my school, we have not really embraced this yet. I'm really introducing it around. We do have a moral component, and we actually do some things that are in line with what I've described. I could give you an example if you'd like to hear one. One of the examples is we have sent people to where some of our soldiers, currently soldiers are engaged in activity, and I think some of them came from early on from Afghanistan, and we would ask a captain when he had to describe a situation, when he had to decide whether to shoot or not. And we have this on videotape, and the captains describe a very complex situation. With many, many details and components to it. And before they get to the decision to whether they had to decide to shoot or not, we stop the videotape. We get groups of cadets together. We show them this videotape. We ask them to process this. We ask them to decide what they would do in those circumstances with all the implications that there are sociological implications, many, many different kinds of implications. And we also have talked with high-ranking military officials, mostly full colonels, and asking them what are the left and right guidelines for action, given the rules of engagement, given the military ethic, given the situation. The cadets process this, and they talk about it. They're developing these rich, complex schema. And the intent is, when they get out into the real world, that if they are in a situation that's an ambiguous situation and requires very quick thinking, that processing that they have done will help them to make very quick decisions. We also, by the way, then play the second part of the tape and describe what actually happened and what they did.
Okay, thank you very much.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اسمي رشيد الحمادي من إدارة المناهج بدولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة وزارة التربية والتعليم. My question is to Professor Judd again. I think, how would you address the dichotomy of moral decision-making on the part of the instructors? Because being an instructor for over 2 decades, for example, sometimes I have this dilemma of whether to give this student or favor one student over the other in favor, as far as assessment. So how would you address this dichotomy on the part of the instructors, if you'd like to comment on this? Thank you very much.
I'm not sure I quite understand how to respond to this. The issue is of your assigning grades to students?
Yes.
And some of their background or your background influences it?
Yes, as far as, yes, the background of the instructor, not on the part of the student.
Yeah.
It's a very tough decision sometimes you have to make
as
far as that.
Well, if it's in line with the outcomes of the course and what you're describing, I haven't thought about this, but I will get there. If on the part of an instructor to assigning grades, you have an ethic as a faculty member about how you assign grades and what role your particular background should play in it or not. Even though it's a tough decision, sometimes we have to step back to those ethical principles, I think. And this is a case where you may be influenced by that fast thinking and the emotional component, but this might be a time for the rational thinking and looking at the ethical components of you as a faculty member.
Because it can go both ways. You can favor or unfavor a student. So that's the dilemma that I'm talking about. Probably is very similar to the example you gave of the soldier previously. Thank you.
Yeah, it's similar.
Okay.
One way to deal with that might be within the context of the rest of the faculty members, to see how they would decide the issue, to find out what is in your particular context, your social group, your faculty members' ethic, what seem to be the appropriate guidelines for functioning that way.
Okay, thank you very much. We have only 1 minute. We'll give a preference to lady section if they have the last question. Otherwise, we'll take a last question from this room.
No, thank you. We don't have
Okay, شكرا.
شكرا.
سالم العطيات من جامعة الملك فيصل. في الحقيقة أود شكر الدكتور توماس على هذا البحث المفيد، وأود الإشارة إلى أنه جرت العديد من الأبحاث مؤخرا في مجال دقيق وهو البزنس إثكس وريسبونسبل مانجمنت إديوكيشن، وهناك الحقيقة الكثير من
على طول
الأبحاث.
السؤال الله يخليك. سؤال.
Just a comment that هناك الكثير من الأبحاث التي أجريت في هذا المجال وتوصلت إلى العديد من الوسائل الإبداعية لتعليم الطلاب أخلاقيات الأعمال. فأنا أرغب إذا كان بالإمكان من الدكتور توماس والمهتمين دراسة هذه المواضيع بالتحديد، ودراسة مدى إمكانية تعميمها على جميع المجالات التعليمية not business ethics only. شكرا جزيلا.
Yes, I'm aware that there are. Yes, oh, sorry. I am aware that there have been a lot of studies looking at ethics in particular, and in particular professional fields looking at that. My question is whether those studies that have looked at the ethical decision-making process are very predictive of the actual behaviors when they get into the field. And some of them show positive relationships between ethical decision-making in particular fields and their professional conduct in the field. When I'm thinking more generally about other areas rather than just professional ethics, that's where I'm coming from with this research.
Okay, thank you very much for attending. Before we leave, the centers would like to thank the speaker. Probably give them some thank you letters at the end of their presentation. So, we'll take a picture.